Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Driving AI and Automation in CSP Networks, sponsored by Mahindra. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. On the left-hand side of your screen is the Q&A box. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit them to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green resource list widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask for your feedback. A survey is already open on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Heavy Reading's Research Director, Cloud and Security, Jim Hodges. Jim?
Thanks, operator, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is entitled Driving AI and Automation in Communication Service Provider Networks. So this is a really important webinar. It's very timely because there's so much happening now in terms of service providers, in terms of what they're doing with network functions and how they're managing complexity in their operations. So in this session today, we're going to be really discussing about how service providers are investing in things like network analytics and AI, machine learning, to really help them create platforms and solutions that really can provide value add to their network functions and really help them manage really smart data-driven services. So what we're going to be doing today in terms of the sessions, we're going to be focusing on how AI is becoming a core capacity or capability for service providers. We'll also talk about some of the steps on really the road towards implementing automation and AI. So let me first introduce today's speakers. We have a very, very strong and knowledgeable panel joining us today. We have with us from AT&T, Raj Savoor, who is Vice President and Vice President Network Analytics and Automation at AT&T. Welcome, Raj.
Great, thank you, Jim.
We also have with us from Mahindra, we have with us Sumugam Balachandran, who is Head of Strategic Delivery and the CTO for Network Services in the Americas at Mahindra. Welcome, Sumugam.
Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here.
I'm looking forward to the discussion. And we also have with us Rajesh Gadiyar, who is Vice President Network in the Edge Group at Intel. Welcome, Rajesh.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, Jim. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the session, I'm going to really kind of start the whole discussion with one slide on what I see as some of the AI and automation trends. And then, given we have such a strong group of presenters and panelists today, we want to spend the majority of the time walking through and giving each of the speakers kind of a panel opportunity to kind of give their insights and some of the real key topics surrounding or driven by automation in terms of some of the drivers, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges. So it'll be very interactive, and then we'll wrap up and we'll take your questions as well. We're also going to be conducting a poll question at the very beginning of this webinar, just to kind of get a level set for where service providers are in the automation journey. So let me first start with AI and automation trends. So really what I want to do is just maybe kind of throw out a number of points that I see is really driving and really influencing the adoption of AI and automation. And so I'm going to be really kind of putting together kind of, I guess, about six or seven key points. And then we'll kind of dive a little bit into these in each one of the panel discussions as well. But the first one I call is AI-driven DevOps. I mean, obviously, for service providers, as we move to the cloud, AI is really, or DevOps is really a vital part of how they deploy, test, and monitor software. And clearly, we know that AI is really going to kind of enhance that because automation AI will really enhance the whole DevOps process as well. So I think that's one of the key drivers as well. And then also cloud scale requirements. It's clear here that as we move to the cloud for different types of services, that we need to be able to have AI and automation tools to really help us leverage that cloud scale. We know we have the raw compute capability, but we have to use AI and automation to really fine tune how we best use that capability, because nothing, even the cloud compute is not infinite. And then 5G service exposure networks. This is obviously as we start rolling out 5G core networks. We all know that 5G core networks are service-based architecture, so they're very much focused on exposing APIs, and they also have very strict budget delays for things like slicing. And again, any sort of AI and automation that we can use will help us monitor this in real time and really help us be able to get the full value and the full measure of value from these 5G networks. And then I said enterprise evolution. You know, there's a lot happening in the enterprise as well. But really for service providers who sell services to the enterprise, I think it's really all about aligning service provider services in various enterprise segments. And what I mean by that is if you look at the enterprise segments, they all have different requirements and different capabilities. And, this whole concept we hear so much about now, the concept of digital twins, is an important one. So this is where the ability where things like testing in industry segment would be able to create kind of an industrial virtual model that would allow them to basically support and test different configurations before they go live. And clearly that's going to be AI driven in many respects. So that's an important part as well. And then just simply AI and cybersecurity, we know that the types of threats are really changing, and AI is going to be a powerful tool for help us in the detection and monitoring of that as well. And then finally, what I just call is the final step in the transition from manual to automated processes. Even without the cloud, even without DevOps, even without 5G, service providers really know that they need to move from manual processes to automated processes, just because of the pace of change that they're really seeing in their networks as services evolve. So I think those are some of the automation trends, and we'll be doing a deep dive in some of these topics and even more topics as we go into the panel discussion. But before we get to the panel discussion, I did want to just kind of conduct a poll question and kind of, as I say, get a sort of a level set. So the poll question for you, the audience, is how prepared is your organization to integrate AI and automation? So we're asking you, are you very well prepared? Are you very well prepared? You're implementing your strategy. Have you completed the strategy? Are you working on a strategy, or you haven't even started strategy completion yet? So if you can provide us input now, that would be really, really helpful to us, kind of give us a bit of a level set here. So I'll give the audience some time here to fill us in, but it'd be really helpful if you can give us your thoughts. And so, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. Raj and Sumugam and Rajesh, it'll be interesting to see what the audience comes up here. But I think in some respects it is still early days, but there's been so much happening in the last little while that I think it's really important that that the audience members that we get their polls from give us their thoughts. So there's still some people still submitting poll results here, so let's just wait here. Don't push that out, and we'll give the audience maybe 5 more seconds before we move on. Okay. So let's see here. We've got about 30%. Let's see what the audience said. So actually, probably not too much of a surprise here. So I'll let each of the three kind of jump in here. But 26%, pretty progressive, said that they're implementing a strategy. 11 have completed a strategy. The largest group by far. 52% said working on a strategy. And 11% said they haven't started a strategy completion yet. So I see this as kind of aligned with, I would sort of, my ad hoc view of the world in terms of what's happening. There's so much, as I said, so much going on, so much strategy being developed. But 52% are still working on it. And maybe, again, Raj or Sumugam or Rajesh, any sort of surprises here from your perspective? This is kind of what I expected to see.
No, I was expecting to see working on a strategy to be the higher percentage. I'm actually not surprised at the results.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same from my perspective. In fact, I would say actually, given how AI is becoming pervasive in the infrastructure, I'm actually encouraged that at least the last poll question here is showing about 10%. So it looks like 90% of the folks are either working on a strategy or they feel like they're well prepared or they've completed a strategy, which is actually very encouraging. So very much in line with like what I was expecting to see.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So for that 52%, or even the ones that have completed a strategy and working on it, for everybody who is working on a strategy or implementing, you come to the right place, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's webinar. So let's just jump into the panel discussion. As I said, I really want to leverage the skill set of this really strong panel we have with us today. So the first question I want to kind of dive into is, what is driving service providers to implement AI and automation? And I see, like I said, I touched on some of the trends here. I see a lot of different moving parts here. I see, cost pressures, including cost of scale, service performance requirements, enhancing network operations, security, or really anything else. So let me just start and jump into the panelists. Maybe Rajesh, I'll start with you. What do you see as kind of maybe what's driving service providers to really implement AI and automation? We just seen a lot of the service providers are really stepping up and doing it. What do you see as driving this fundamentally?
Yeah, Jim. First of all, thank you for having me on this panel, and it's great to partner with Raj and Sumugam here. And as I said, AI is increasingly becoming pervasive in the infrastructure. So it's great to actually have this conversation today. If I take a step back and look at the last 10 or 12 years, right, I think we've actually made tremendous progress with network transformation, network virtualization. So if I go back in time, like maybe 10 years or so, in the era of 3G and early LTE, we were still deploying appliances that were vertically integrated. And so since then, if you see, actually, we have disaggregated hardware from software. We've come a long way with virtualizing network functions, network applications. And that actually set us up really well for 5G deployments. And now, increasingly in the last 2-3 years, maybe we are embracing more cloud-native practices, more microservice container-based deployment models. While all of this transformation has actually given us tremendous benefit, it has actually helped us disaggregate hardware from software. It has actually helped us grow the ecosystem, so we have many more choices now. We are also actually set up really well for monetizing some of this, telco infrastructure, right? Like vRAN, edge computing. What has also happened as a result of this, while there have been a lot of benefits, there is also a lot of complexity in terms of how you manage, and you can't actually continue to do what I would refer to as policy-driven automation, right? Mostly static policies. Something goes bad in the network, you take the following action kind of paradigm, right? So now the world that we live in, with the hardware software disaggregation and increasingly more software and services disaggregation and distributed computing, I think it becomes extremely important that we embrace automation. I'm actually beginning to see service providers put a lot of emphasis. I think a key factor is to deal with the increasing complexity, because you can't actually roll a truck every time something goes wrong in the infrastructure or you want to install a new service. So you want actually more automation. And I think given how AI has matured, there is a great opportunity to use AI to drive what I would refer to as closed loop automation, right? So make use of the telemetry data, both application telemetry, platform telemetry data, build mature, trained AI models that can actually give you real-time intelligence and help you drive the orchestration behavior to close the loops and drive AI-driven automation. So I think it's really the benefit associated with reducing the complexity or dealing with the complexity, which in turn is actually growing the cost and sort of like coming in the way of deploying new applications. So I think the service providers can actually solve many of these problems, both bring the agility, deploy new applications and services, reduce cost by embracing AI and automation.
Okay, perfect. So you see this as wrap up. You see that all three of these three top ones are important, but you see that AI is really going to help with the complexity, and that's an excellent point. Okay, thank you. Raj, what are your thoughts with this?
No, I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Rajesh said, but just to kind of first provide a perspective on where we are in terms of the priorities, in the CSP environment. First, I think there is a cycle of investment in new technology that's kind of unique right now. Not just the 5G investment in wireless, but a lot of investment in fiber, particularly at AT&T in terms of how we're thinking about being a kind of a premium broadband provider, kind of fueling a lot of or meeting a lot of the demand out there for bandwidth. The second kind of driver is a lot of transformation, both in our workflows and processes that's underway. So kind of a definition first, when we think about this whole space, we separate AI as the engine and data as the fuel for that engine. So when we kind of drive both of these into solving problems, certainly a whole class of operational problems can be solved much faster and with a lot more efficacy in there. Things that Rajesh talked about, kind of solving the complexity, taking from open loop to closed loop. There's certainly a lot of operational benefits that are realized. The second is in kind of the customer experience, as well as what the design of services and products is evolving to. And some of these are native capabilities that AI enables. And an example I think you have up here is security and threat analytics. Network-based security to provide that, I think, is a natural derivative, from the AI engine, looking at the data and detecting those threats and protecting our customers. And there's a kind of a third aspect, and this is a whole new class of optimization problems that can be solved with AI. And some of these problems are emerging, with the complexity that we just talked about, and things like energy, sustainability, energy savings and sustainability, which we had not thought about previously at this scale. So I think that's kind of the those are kind of the drivers in the CSP.
Yeah, excellent insights. The sustainability is an interesting one because you're right. I'm seeing more as we talk to service providers. Yeah. Okay, Sumugam, what are your thoughts with this topic?
Actually, I have to echo both Rajesh and Raj here. They've hit the nail on the complexity being a huge driver, especially with the service providers bringing in new technologies, new differentiated services for their existing customers, new customers across multiple industry verticals. Definitely makes the network much more complex. And with this sort of a service assurance being expected to be given to the customers and the densification of the macro and micro coverage happening, it really makes it a very complex scenario. And in addition, the heterogeneity, right, the multi-cloud environment that we are expected to live in, the confluence of the 4G and the 5G worlds, definitely is going to drive in a lot of these capabilities into the service providers. And I think it has now become an absolute necessity that this starts to be looked at very closely, and every CSP has to have a very clear strategy and vision as to how they want to get towards it. One of the things I also believe is going to drive the AI ML-based capabilities are the what-if scenarios. And I think there is a lot of value in that is, can you predict or proactively say, what if there is a surge in traffic in this particular area, how my network is going to behave? And that sort of deep learning capabilities and predictions with whatever level of accuracy that we can do based on the training models is going to become very useful. Give it Super Bowl or any other big calling event or mass data event. these things can work very handy, and it'll help us get prepared. And also, as customers, subscribers move from networks to other networks, come and join, to be able to proactively stay ahead and find this what ifs is going to help assure better customer experience, in my opinion. So definitely customer experience is the end goal, but complexity, heterogeneity, and I think the what ifs are going to be the huge drivers.
Yeah, yeah, great points. And the whole concept you just talked about in terms of the what ifs, yeah, there's a lot happening in terms of how even enterprises are changing, and I think you're absolutely right that the whole network operation model is important. Okay, let's move on to another topic. We wanted to also talk about analytics, because obviously, this is kind of a key part with 5G, defining NWDAP for the first time. Analytics has been a foundational component of 4G networks for some time, and 5G with the NWDAP kind of, really kind of, I would say, put some structure around that. But, obviously 5G networks are also very much driven by automation. So this is something that I'm still researching, and I'm not as clear into, what is the impact of introduction of AI and automation on existing analytics platforms. Service providers have deployed analytics platforms for 7-8 years, and automation, I think, is going to enhance that. But I think it's important that we kind of address this as a panel just to understand that. And maybe, Sumugam, I'll start with you first.
So it's a very interesting question. It is one of the things that may or may not accelerate the adoption in many cases. But from my perspective, vantage point, my background is a service, we come in from a services perspective, agnostic to the technology or the CSPs, where what I believe is this is a huge opportunity. I don't see an impact there. Here is a huge opportunity to get better and improve the performances and improve the experiences. The ability to marry the legacy data sets with the new upcoming technology, with deep machine learning capabilities and algorithms coming into picture, is only going to provide much better insights. And with much better insights, we're going to have much more effective closed-loop automation. I think it's very important that we see it from that perspective, because the AML pipelines are set up, right? They generically are set up to be able to consume data from discrete sources, crowdsourced data, there is FB analytics, third-party data, customer revenue data. You can bring that all, marry that into your KPI performance analytics when your case counts have gone up. All of this can be seamlessly brought in, and they still can stay federated in their own places while the data can be processed centrally, right? So I think that's a huge power that AIML brings into the picture. And I think it's very important that that is how we approach the adoption strategy, that don't see this as a impediment, but as an enabler, is my opinion.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. When I started, I've been covering analytics for 7 or 8 years, and when I first started looking at it, you talk about data lakes, but there was sort of a static nature of where the data was available. As you said, though, now we're moving to edge, disparate data sources. We need some sort of way to be able to aggregate this holistically, to be able to, sort of assemble it in kind of, real time in a cloud-native environment. So yeah, I think AI and automation is going to have a huge impact on how analytics platforms performance. Rajesh, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what Sumugam said, right? I think from my perspective, I think like a lot of like what I've seen is, like you said, Jim, it's like static, it's policy-based, analytics. And I think the growing complexity in the infrastructure, I think is just not going to allow us to scale, right, in the cloud native era. And I think there is a need to look at this holistically across sort of like 3 elements, right? So first is, actually there is I think it was Raj who said earlier, AI is the engine and data is the fuel, right? And to me, a lot of the data is telemetry data coming from either network functions or edge applications or the infrastructure itself, right? And now taking all this data and making it usable, right, structured data through some, well-defined standard interfaces like, we've actually worked on things like CollectD and Prometheus that allows you to bring data through a standard interface into a data lake, and then being able to apply AI, build AI models, train with the historical time series data, and create accurate models that can be then used to in real time, right? As things are happening in the infrastructure or in the application, you drive real-time inferencing, real-time intelligence that can actually help you close the loop, whether it is things like RAN intelligent controllers in the radio access network, vRAN, like Open RAN deployments, or energy management, or even sort of like how you deal with failures in the applications and infrastructure. All of these are great examples where introduction of AI and AI-driven automation actually has a pretty significant role to play, over time, right? So yeah, I'm looking forward to how we actually make this holistic, how we tie together the telemetry, the AI piece of it, and AI-driven analytics to then drive closed-loop automation with orchestration systems. So the network infrastructure and the edge infrastructure begins to work like an automated, autonomous car, if you will, right? If I can use that analogy.
Yeah. Okay, really interesting point. Maybe, and Raj, maybe we'll give you the last thoughts here. You're actually doing this, so.
Yeah, and I'll make a couple of comments to kind of start. And the first is, we look at, the impact here and the change that the new AI capabilities bring is evolutionary. I think, all communication service providers have had a kind of a rich legacy of, managing data sets and telemetry data and monitoring, as well as analytics platforms. And we are on that path of evolution where, we are now trying to say, okay, how can we design our data pipelines better for near real time or non-real time, workloads? How do we expose that data better? What is that democratic marketplace internally for those different use cases that you can drive? There's also a notion of how do you bring the intelligence close to the edge? What is the edge definition? And the edge keeps moving, right? So that is the reason that you are driving that constantly, and move those intelligent functions. And finally, there's this whole notion of an AI feature store. How do you write your either atomic or molecular AI machine learning models, or even your intelligent applications, whether they are apps or X apps, and have those portable across different controls and environments. So all these are how we're kind of thinking about the evolution, and I kind of when we talk about introduction, the assumption is that this is new. Well, there are elements that are new, but in many cases there are existing capabilities that are evolving. So I think Rajesh mentioned, going from policy-driven static rules to kind of more dynamic, rules that with different training models that you can apply. And I'll just make a reference back to the poll you had at the very beginning, where you talk about where people are in strategy. So I look at strategy also as evolutionary, right? So it's not that you can stay dormant with just one principle. You're constantly evolving that. So I think that snapshot you have on where CSPs are, and I kind of certainly agree with kind of what the poll number said, is actually a point in time. So you'll see this kind of cycling of CSP strategies based on the dynamics that is talked about. So those that are kind of constantly in transformation.
Yeah, excellent points. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk, and I think this next one, I think we probably already maybe touched on a little bit. So don't turn off your camera, Raj. We'll come to you first on this one, but it's what is the greatest network operations related benefit associated with AI? I mean, we talked about operations in terms of monitoring, edge, data management. So there's a number of different parts here. So maybe we've kind of touched on some of these already, but maybe let's kind of drill down and for the sake of the audience, give them kind of a more granular view of what we think the greatest network operations benefit is. Maybe Raj will put you on the spot first.
Yeah, happy to. So first, I kind of want to say, when we look at the opportunity space, we put it in kind of three views into our network. So we kind of call it the day zero, day one, and day two. And the day zero is the how do we plan for our network? So that's the forecasting and planning functions. Allude to some of the comments Sumu made earlier on the what if scenarios. Those all kind of fall in that first category. Over here, the benefit of improving precision and accuracy in forecasts or planning, planning for your network, even improving things like spectral efficiency, have a huge multiplier impact. And it's really a function of your budget, of what your build and deployment capital, planning is, and customer acquisition view. So you have this huge multiplier where you get the benefits. The second category is the, or what we call the day one, is your build function, where you're actually going out and implementing your network design, your reference designs, and you're putting in your towers, you're turning up switches, and you're building out backhaul links and so on. The role AI plays is kind of ensuring that when you build, you are doing it right the first time and minimizing the errors in that process or in that workflow that occur. And this is everything, smaller areas like configuration audits that occur, or validation steps, or detecting PIM, passive intermodular interference, more accurately. And by doing those steps, you minimize repeating those steps, and that has a huge multiplier, because that's the kind of the repeat, truck roll. And then we look at kind of the day two functions, which this is really where you're operating the network, and this is where I think AI plays a role, going from kind of the open loop operations to closed loop, especially those repeatable tasks that or events that keep coming up that you don't want you can avoid the human intervention, and you can take care of them in an automated way. A lot of intelligent controller-based modules kind of play a role. So each of these, and particularly the second and third one, the multiplier is those truck rolls. It's where that the human intervention comes in that you can avoid. So there is a benefit to the bottom line operationally there. As we talked about earlier, there's actually a benefit to the top line as well in what you can enable for your customers and enrich your services and products as well. So certainly a multi-pronged opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, that's really, and thank you for that, because I think that really gives the audience some sort of a clarity of the different stages and what to expect in each one of those. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Sumugam, maybe your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Raj beautifully covered the day 0, 1, and 2. But let me, operations is close to my heart, so I'll spend some time there on what I see are the key benefits. One is straightforward, right? MTTR, mean time to resolve, right? The more AIML pipelines get operational and deep learning comes into picture, and as the temporal dependencies are, reduced and converged, you really have to start seeing the benefits of, how quickly you can resolve an issue. So I think that is a huge benefit. And the concomitant result of that is also this is where I feel this is very important is you sort of give the power into the hands of the front lines. With the quality insights coming in from well-trained models that have converged well, having good subject matter intelligence and the data sciences capabilities, you now can actually move the capabilities of resolving and taking decisions much more upstream than what it used to be. The NOC guys should be able to make the decisions. You should start getting things first time right more and more and more. So these are very powerful things that makes a NOC, again, directly translates into customer experience improvements. You can start, service level assurance on slices, right? You can just maintain a particular service at a very high quality based on AML based, service assurance capabilities. So I think, the overall summary of what I think is the best benefit is to resolve things fast, bringing the power in the hands of the first line um, towards the customer, having deep insights into what they can do to resolve and getting it first time right.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's really important too, like your points you made about kind of the whole idea of the NOC being able to sort of empower the NOC. That's an important requirement as we move data to different sources. Okay, interesting. Rajesh, maybe I'll give you the final word on this one.
Yeah, I think Raj and Sumugam have exhaustively covered this, and they're, I think, talking from their real deployment experience. I guess I can actually add maybe one additional perspective on this one, right? So when you think about the benefits for network operations, for me, the biggest thing is how do we change the paradigm from one of reactive approaches to network operations when, as an example, when things go bad in the network, like there is a error scenario, there's a failure scenario. Most of the approaches today are one of sort of like reacting to failure scenarios. And to me, actually, the biggest benefit that you get from AI and automation is to make it actually a predictive approach, right? So wouldn't it be nice actually if you could actually use the telemetry data, you could use the network behavior, you could use the time series information trained models to really predict when things are going to go bad and be able to sort of like recover from it without really sort of like hitting that error scenario or going to the downtime. So to me, actually, that's the crux of it. It's really sort of like, how do we change the paradigm from reacting to situations versus sort of like predicting certain kinds of behaviors that actually allows us to do better management, better orchestration, better closed loop automation. So that's sort of like how I like to think about this.
Yeah, and it's a valid point. So we just talked about analytics. Kind of the dream of analytics was to move to this predictive analytics model, right? Being able to not just analyze the data sort of after events, but be kind of predict the future. So yeah, there's a lot of different moving parts to that. So I think you're right. Analytics, enhancing network operation, things like NOCs is really key. But with this comes some challenges as well. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that. And Rajesh, I'll let you have the first shot at this one. What is the greatest challenge you think that service providers really currently face in implementing AI? We talked about complexity, but it's certainly more than that, I think. What are your thoughts here, Rajesh?
Yeah, I think like, the need of the hour is really sort of like taking a holistic approach. And what I mean by that is, I think most tools today, they tend to focus on certain aspects of, either operations or, they tend, like what I've seen is actually, I think there is a real need for taking a more holistic approach, especially when we are increasingly sort of like moving to an era where there is a hardware-software separation. More often than not, actually, infrastructure is actually owned by somebody else, and then the applications are deployed on top of that infrastructure. And so there are like increasingly now two separate fault domains, right? There is the infrastructure, and then there's the applications that are running on top of it. And so there is a real need to be able to, the tools and how we actually do these, the analytics it needs to actually have a strong correlation with the hardware, with the infrastructure, and what's happening with the applications and the operational side of this, and the need to sort of tie these together in a very meaningful way. And so this is where actually we put a lot of our focus on. So we've sort of looked at how do we, as a hardware provider, how do we actually make it easy for that platform telemetry data to be made available, so you can actually use the data correlated to the application telemetry, and then consequently actually drive the analytics and closed loop automation. So we've actually designed plugins that allow you to make this easier. I talked about things like Collectd and Prometheus. We have actually Telegraph plugins for all insight reports, ranging from utilization of the infrastructure to congestion to some of the reliability capabilities, power management, configuration, and stuff like that. And a lot of these are like streaming insight reports. And then we are looking to sort of work with the ecosystem. So I think it was like a couple of weeks ago that I had actually done a similar kind of a webinar with one of our partners, Expo. And Expo and Intel have actually worked together to really bring to what I was actually referring to earlier, which is like a more holistic approach to how you drive analytics and AI for a lot of these scenarios, ranging from how you recover from different kinds of failures in the infrastructure to more efficient energy management, leveraging all the hooks that are in the hardware. Because at the end of the day, actually, energy management, energy costs are sort of like the biggest contributor to the operational cost for any operator. So yes, I think these are sort of like the challenges that we've been sort of like looking to address from our perspective from Intel.
It's interesting. So you see it as everything from software even to a hardware level as well. Interesting. Raj, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think I'll actually jump on what Rajesh said, which is spot on. The telemetry data and the fine-grained visibility that is now exposed, and in our current disaggregated architectures here, as well as kind of the separation of having both white box and introduction, a lot more correlation has to be done, and a lot more data kind of gets exposed, requiring it both on the horizontal service path as well as on the vertical stack. So the first, I would characterize kind of the first, moving problem is, design of these data pipelines, for the near real time as well as non-real time, use cases at scale. So that, continues to be, how do you ingest the data, bring into the right framework. The second one, and this is really a function of the service provider and scale and that you're operating at, is how do you make the infrastructure, the analytics and AI infrastructure more democratic, so it is well exposed and can be used by multiple use cases at the most economic way. So the engineering economics really matter there. We are fortunate we have a really forward-thinking CTO office, and a chief data officer particularly focuses on some of these areas that allow to maximize those benefits. But that is a challenge. That is something that is, continues to be kind of a moving problem. I'll also give a tactical example, beyond kind of those generalities. As we are in this path of, moving from a legacy vertically integrated network to a disaggregated open, more open network, there is a need for a lot of those legacy applications to migrate into the new environment. And this is probably a challenge in the industry that we look at, is that we need better SDKs to enable porting of those analytic capabilities in the new environment. So the investment required is minimized to pay for it twice for what you paid for once already, and then you're moving into a new environment. And a good example is on the radio intelligent controllers. We've had legacy SON platforms, and we have invested in a lot of very rich applications that are still relevant. How do we migrate them very efficiently to our apps or even X apps? So there's a lot of service provider interest in that space.
So it's interesting because I kind of expected one of the other panelists to kind of talk about migration, but I think you're absolutely right. This whole notion of migrating or migration of services is really a key part of this, and for me anyway. Yeah, it's well said. Sumugam, I'll let you add your thoughts to this one before we move on.
Yeah, I will come at it slightly, subtly different. One of the challenges is the technology providers or CSPs, in my opinion, are all trying to do something different in their own way. While the industry is trying hard to standardize, right? We have the 3GPP, RAN 3, we have the NWDAF, MDAF, MDAS, all the Linux Foundation ones, the HC ones. There is no one standardization happening around the approach at all in this space. And I think that is something that has to be, and I think we need to sort of drive it open back into the community so that sort of starts to happen, right? If there will be partnerships, alliances between technology and tool vendors happening, and they come up with their own. Partly, it is exciting for folks like us because we come in with the innovation, we can bring in partners, capabilities, and we can come up with solutions to solve that problem when that standardization is not existent. But the problem is that the standardization doesn't exist. And when it comes to AI implementation per se, one thing I think everybody should be aware of is now we will be moving away from standard software lifecycle management principles, where we build, test, deploy, and retire. Now we are talking about building, modeling, training, testing, and then retiring. So AI/ML comes with its own lifecycle management capabilities that the overarching regular software lifecycle capabilities of the CSPs may not easily work together. So that I think is a huge challenge, and it is a day one challenge to me when it comes to implementing AI in the space. The other thing is the cost. GPUs don't come inexpensive, right? The more deep learning your models are going to be, the more expensive it is going to be for you to be managing an AI/ML based network. Now, there are very innovative things that are being done. We are involved with some of our partners wherein we talk about persistent modeling, wherein we just take a very standard set of data, model it, and then track the delta for it. We do federated modeling, wherein we move that modeling into the edge onto the, and then bring just the reporting back. So there are some innovative stuffs happening in that space. But again, that cost is a huge challenge in my opinion.
Yeah,
again.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And the access to data, there's huge amount of data requirement in this space because, better the data, better is the quality of prediction and accuracy. So, transferring data, security around it, how to minimize the transfer points. These are the things that are being actively thought about and solved as we start implementing. I think these are the huge challenges in my opinion.
Yeah, great points. So let's talk a little bit. I think we want to maybe spend too much time. We wanted to save some time for Q&A, but we've already kind of touched on sort of the linkage between AI and automation and sustainability. So maybe Sumugam, I'll start with you. To what extent do you think AI and automation are linked to service provider sustainability? You just talked about sort of GPU managing GPUs. Obviously, GPUs take power as well. There's a cost, but there's also a power to run them. So you have to optimize that. So to what extent do you think that these two are linked already?
Yeah, the cost is definitely, when I brought up the GPU from a cost angle, but then, there is, what you have to realize is how your, the OpEx, CapEx management also happens. So definitely sustainability, the future of sustainability is going to be AI driven. That part I'm absolutely clear, especially, I see a lot of progress being made in Europe already in the space wherein they are using insights to, turn off, macro coverage, micro coverage in many places based on the traffic pattern analysis and the what if analysis. So definitely it's a huge role to play in. Again, the green strategies, meaning the advantage of the AML pipelines is the number of data sources that they can feed off and build their insights into. And that's why I think, AML-based strategies are going to be key for the sustainability targets and goals of all of these service providers.
Okay, yeah, well said. Rajesh, I assume you agree with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, for us, this is here and now. We've been working with the comm service providers all around the globe on this sustainability angle and how we help drive better energy management. And in particular, we've sort of look to implement AI time series based data, right? There's a lot of rich data that exists in every operator network. And how do we actually provide fine-grained controls in our hardware, right? So as you know, our CPUs already have what we call as the P states and C states, right? So power states that allow you to manage. So if the historical time series data tells you that in the evening your RAN infrastructure is going to be only 50% or 60% utilized, or your consequently your wireless core is going to be only like 60% or 70% utilized. How can you then in an automated fashion, using closed loop automation, right, drive to lower P states? So simply go down the frequency voltage curve, and that actually helps you save power, right? And so we've been actually consistently talking about this for the last couple of years. Actually, at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, we had at least like 2 or 3 sort of like real implementations of this working with our ecosystem. So for us, actually, this is sort of like the biggest focus area: sustainability. How do we actually drive, all the way from instrumentation capabilities that we build in our hardware, and how we expose that through telemetry, how we actually work with the ecosystem to enable them to make use of these capabilities and drive that automation. This is sort of like the biggest focus area for us, and I completely agree.
Yeah, and it's an area that heavy reading, we're moving into this coverage area as well. We see it, we have this symposium called the Programmable Telco. We've got a session called Software Unheats the World. And it's kind of the same idea. And I think it's going to be software is going to be a huge part of this as we move forward, and even hardware as well. So maybe, Raj, I'll let you wrap this one up before we move on to the last topic.
Yeah, and I think both Sumo and Rajesh made really good points, and just to kind of pick up where Rajesh left off on the PNC state management, great area, and I think we really I think the innovation and advances that Intel's providing the controls is something we really need, because energy is a large part of the total cost of ownership. I would tell you that the intelligent controls that we get to actually use them does need a lot of AI, and to kind of have training models to understand not just time of day behavior, but workload behavior, because within those states, there's a lot of differences and implications. For example, within even the idle state, one of the states, C6, where you stop the clock and you flush the cache, to restart activity has a certain duration of time. So you have to be very careful how you use these very fine-grained controls that are now exposed. And to do it with precision requires a lot of data analysis to ensure that you're modeling and applying those controls well. So, we certainly expect to utilize those and apply kind of AI to do that. I want to kind of, address kind of 2 other aspects in kind of sustainability domain. One is kind of in the longer term view, and you kind of look at broader climate change implications, and you think about communication service providers building out networks that have to, withstand the threat of fires, hurricanes, tornado events. where you build those out, what kind of redundancy and resilience you need is critical. And you have to, the investment you make is not just for a year or 6 months in a single data center. We are talking about infrastructure that's out in potentially very hostile environments, and whether it's aerial or buried environments, prone to flooding or with climate change. So we are actually looking at and working with Argonne Labs and other entities to bring data and climate change modeling into that planning domain. So some of the things that Sumu talked about on those what-if scenarios, this is a large part of kind of long-term sustainability and how are you building those networks out. And then that sub-part on kind of resiliency, the weekend there was a outage at a service provider in Canada, and we've known about some of these outages that have occurred in even in a lot of the cloud web scale providers. And it may seem very innocuous about a BGP advertisement, lack of or isolation, driving, a widespread impact. Some of these can be better understood or work proactively using a digital twin or a simulation capability on identifying where those risks are, what those changes could drive, and in that kind of continuum of what do you test, validate, and simulate and model before you make a change in the network, raises kind of the importance or amplifies the need for a lot more proactive modeling or chaos monkey type simulation for resiliency. So I kind of put some of those longer term aspects and resiliency as core in the whole sustainability domain.
Yeah, it's interesting because we won't be building data centers or switching centers like the NEBS compliant with no windows in the future, and as we've done in the past, and sort of diverse power. Okay, so excellent discussion. So we got one topic here that we're not going to be able to get into it too much, but I think we've already kind of touched on it. So while we're here, though, we've got about 3 minutes left, and there are a couple of questions that came in, and this question is kind of very similar to this discussion topic. So the question is basically related to steps in the implementation process. So it's one that we've got here that's identical to what I wanted to wrap up with. And it's basically, we've already done the survey that talked about, that a lot of service providers are developing strategy. But, the question kind of says, a lot of organizations seem to be automating something just to show that they can automate something, and that there's a lot of different sort of independent projects that might be sort of in conflict with each other. So maybe, Raj, I'll let you kind of, you talked about use cases and you talked about sustainability, but maybe just really quickly, what do you see as kind of a process for being able to make sure that you're not implementing, just try to use some use cases to automate something, but you're actually trying to do something that's going to be sort of something you can share with the whole industry? Maybe just in 30 seconds, what you see as kind of what's really important in the implementation process.
So I think I'll repeat kind of one of my comments earlier, and this is kind of, and I think you touched on it too, Jim, and that is the importance of kind of having a network digital twin, and why is that important? And I think this brings together all the aspects we talked about in the discussion today. And this requires kind of that rich data layer, requires kind of that network awareness and discovery, and it requires both a deterministic parametric modeling and some discrete event driven simulation capability to solve the type of problems that we think AI is capable of solving. And some of these would happen in that real-time mode. It needs a lot of data classification, needs that well-exposed democratic AI feature store. A lot of those components come together. But the opportunities that a network digital twin expose are really, really going to provide great benefits to operators across those, three time domains I mentioned, day 0, day 1, day 2.
Okay. Great insight. So unfortunately, we're just about out of time here. So one thing the operator mentioned at the beginning, there's a survey for the audience. If you can take the survey, the audience, provide us input in today's section, it'll help us plan for future sessions. So this time just flew by. As I said, I said we had a very knowledgeable panelist group here today, and we did, and it provided me some really valuable insights and kind of helping me sort of, I guess, validate some of the assumptions that I'm working with. So I'm sure it was helpful to the audience. So first of all, I'd like to thank Tech Mahindra and Intel for participating and sponsoring today's webinar, and I'd also like to thank Raj from AT&T for providing us his insights as well into this very important journey of AI and automation. So we're going to wrap it up here again. I'd like to thank the audience for attending today's session, and we hope to see you again at future webinars. So for light reading, this is Jim Hodges. Thanks to the audience for attending, and thanks to the wonderful panelists we had on today's session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.